The city of New York buzzed with its usual chaos. Cars honked impatiently, street vendors shouted to attract customers, and pedestrians hurried along the sidewalks, their faces buried in phones or scarves against the biting wind. It was just another evening in the concrete jungle, but for Officer Ryan Carter it felt like any other shift, long, tedious, and filled with people who didn't seem to care about rules. Ryan leaned back in the driver's seat of his patrol car, one hand resting on the steering wheel while the other held a cup of lukewarm coffee. At 34 years old, he had spent more than a decade wearing the badge, and lately, it felt heavier than ever. The job wasn't what he thought it would be when he first joined. Back then, he imagined himself as a hero, someone who made a difference. Now, all he saw were endless hours of paperwork, ungrateful citizens, and a system that seemed broken beyond repair. He sighed, taking another sip of the bitter coffee before tossing the empty cup into the passenger seat. His partner for the night, Officer Greg Miller, glanced at him from behind the wheel. "You okay, man?" Greg asked casually, his tone light but tinged with concern. "Yeah," Ryan muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. "Just tired of this crap." Greg nodded knowingly. He'd been around long enough to understand Ryan's frustrations. "Tell me about it. But hey, we've still got a few hours left. Let's try to make it through without too much drama." Ryan grunted in response, staring out the window at the passing streets. They were cruising through a relatively quiet neighborhood now, where rows of brownstone buildings lined the roads and trees stood bare against the cold November sky. It was a part of town that rarely saw trouble, at least not the kind that required immediate attention, but Ryan knew better than to let his guard down completely. As they turned onto a side street, Greg pointed ahead. "Hey, check that out." Ryan followed his gaze and spotted a black sedan parked halfway on the curb. Its rear tires were slightly over the white line, violating parking regulations. It wasn't a major offense, but it was something. Ryan straightened up, suddenly grateful for the distraction. "Let's see what's going on here," he said, reaching for the radio to report their location. They pulled up behind the sedan, and Ryan stepped out of the car, adjusting his belt as he approached the vehicle. Through the tinted windows, he could make out a figure sitting inside, a woman judging by her silhouette. Her head was tilted downward, likely focused on her phone. Ryan tapped lightly on the driver's side window, motioning for her to roll it down. When the window lowered, Ryan found himself looking at a woman in her late 30s. She had smooth, dark skin, sharp features, and an air of quiet confidence. Her hair was styled neatly into braids, and she wore a tailored coat that suggested professionalism. For a moment, Ryan hesitated, caught off guard by her composed demeanor. Most people would have been flustered or apologetic upon being flagged down by a cop, but this woman simply raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to speak. "Good evening, ma'am," Ryan began, adopting the formal tone he always used during stops. "Do you realize you're parked partially on the curb?" The woman glanced at the rearview mirror, then back at him. "Yes, I do," she replied calmly. "I was just dropping something off. I'll move it shortly." Her tone was polite but firm, lacking the deference Ryan expected. Something about it irked him, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. Maybe it was the way she met his gaze directly, as if challenging him to find fault. Or maybe it was the subtle implication that she didn't need his permission to explain herself. "Well, ma'am, I'm going to need you to move it now," Ryan said, his voice sharpening slightly. "This isn't a loading zone." "I understand," the woman responded, still unruffled. "And I said I'll move it shortly. There's no harm in giving me a minute." Ryan frowned, feeling a flicker of irritation rise within him. Who did she think she was, talking back like that? He took a step closer to the car, leaning down so he could look her squarely in the eye. "Ma'am, I don't know if you're aware, but parking violations carry fines. If you don't comply, I'll have no choice but to issue you a ticket." The woman studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she spoke again, her voice steady. "Officer, I'm fully aware of the law, and I assure you, I have every intention of moving my car. But your tone suggests otherwise, that you're treating this as if I've committed some grave crime. Is that really necessary?" Her words hit a nerve. Ryan felt his jaw tighten as annoyance gave way to anger. How dare she question him? He was the authority here, not her. "Listen, lady," he snapped, abandoning any pretense of politeness. "I'm just doing my job. If you don't like it, take it up with someone else." The woman's eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't respond immediately. Instead, she reached for the gear shift, clearly intending to drive away. But Ryan wasn't done. Something about her attitude, the calmness, the refusal to back down, stirred up feelings he hadn't realized were simmering beneath the surface. Feelings of resentment, frustration, and even fear. Fear of losing control, of being challenged, of appearing weak. Before he could stop himself, Ryan placed a hand on the doorframe, preventing her from closing the window. "You think you're special, huh?" he said, his voice low and cutting. "Think you can talk to me like that because you've got a fancy car and a nice coat?" The woman stared at him, her lips pressed together in a thin line. "Excuse me?" she said finally, her voice icy. "Are you seriously implying what I think you are?" Ryan ignored her question, his temper spiraling out of control. Without thinking, he grabbed her arm roughly, pulling her halfway out of the car. "Maybe you need to learn some respect," he growled, his face inches from hers. For a split second, time seemed to freeze. The woman winced in pain but didn't cry out. Instead, she looked at him with a mixture of shock and disdain, as if she couldn't believe what was happening. And then, just as quickly, Ryan released her, stepping back as reality crashed over him. What had he done? Greg appeared beside him, his expression alarmed. "Ryan, what the hell are you doing?" he hissed, glancing nervously at the woman who was now climbing out of the car, visibly shaken. I, Ryan stammered, unable to form a coherent sentence. He watched as the woman straightened her coat, her movements deliberate and controlled. She didn't say anything, didn't scream or lash out. Instead, she fixed him with a piercing stare that sent a chill down his spine. "You'll hear from me soon," she said quietly, her voice carrying a weight that made Ryan's stomach churn. Then she got back into her car and drove away, leaving him standing there, heart pounding and mind racing. As the sedan disappeared around the corner, Ryan turned to Greg, who looked equally uneasy. "Man, you really messed up," Greg muttered, shaking his head. "That's gonna come back to bite you." Ryan didn't respond. He already knew Greg was right, but deep down, he couldn't shake the gnawing sense that this wasn't just another routine traffic stop gone wrong. Something about the woman and the way she carried herself told him this was far from over. The next morning, Ryan woke up with a heavy feeling in his chest. He lay in bed for a few extra minutes, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the previous night over and over again. The image of the woman's face, calm but piercing, haunted him. Her words echoed in his mind. "You'll hear from me soon." What did she mean by that? Was she planning to file a complaint? Sue him? Or worse, go public with what happened? He shook his head, trying to push the thoughts away. "It's not a big deal," he muttered to himself, though even he didn't believe it. It was just a traffic stop, right? A minor incident that would probably be forgotten in a day or two. People got emotional during confrontations all the time. Cops were human too. They made mistakes. Surely this wouldn't escalate into anything serious. But as Ryan got ready for work, he couldn't ignore the nagging voice in the back of his mind telling him otherwise. Something about the way the woman carried herself stuck with him. She wasn't like the others he had dealt with on the job, nervous, apologetic, or angry. She was different, confident, in control, and that unnerved him more than he cared to admit. When he arrived at the precinct, the atmosphere felt off. The usual hum of chatter and clatter of keyboards was replaced by an unusual quietness. Officers glanced at him as he walked in, their expressions unreadable. Some looked away quickly, while others exchanged subtle glances. Ryan frowned, brushing it off as paranoia. Maybe they weren't even talking about him. Maybe it was something else entirely. As he settled into his desk, Greg approached him, holding a cup of coffee. "Morning," Greg said, his tone casual, but cautious. "Morning," Ryan replied, forcing a smile. "What's going on? Why's everyone so quiet today?" Greg hesitated, glancing around before leaning in closer. "You haven't seen it yet, have you?" "Seen what?" Ryan asked, his stomach tightening. Greg pulled out his phone and handed it to Ryan. On the screen was a video clip playing in full view. Ryan's breath caught in his throat as he recognized the scene immediately. It was footage of last night's altercation, the woman's car, his patrol vehicle parked behind it, and then him. The camera captured everything. His aggressive stance, the way he leaned into the car, and most damning of all, the moment he grabbed her arm. Ryan's hands trembled as he watched the video. The comment section below the clip was flooded with outrage. Words like abusive, power, racism, and accountability jumped out at him. The post had thousands of shares already, and hashtags like "Allied Justice for Michelle Grant" were trending across social media platforms. "This can't be happening," Ryan whispered, handing the phone back to Greg. His mind raced. How had someone recorded the incident? Who posted it? And why hadn't he noticed anything at the time? "It gets worse," Greg said grimly. "Internal Affairs is looking into it. They've already requested your statement." Ryan sank into his chair, his head spinning. This was bad, really bad. If Internal Affairs launched a formal investigation, it could cost him his badge. Worse still, the department might suspend him without pay until the case was resolved, all because of one stupid mistake. "What am I supposed to do?" Ryan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Greg shrugged helplessly. "Cooperate fully. Don't try to deny anything. Just own up to it and hope for leniency." Ryan nodded, though he didn't feel reassured. Leniency wasn't exactly a hallmark of the NYPD when it came to cases involving misconduct. The department had been under intense scrutiny lately due to several high-profile incidents involving officers accused of racial bias. Public pressure was mounting, and the brass wasn't about to let anyone slide, not even longtime employees like him. Later that afternoon, Ryan was called into a meeting with Captain Lewis, his commanding officer. The room felt suffocating with its gray walls and fluorescent lighting casting harsh shadows. Captain Lewis sat behind his desk, his expression stern. Two representatives from Internal Affairs flanked him, their faces equally unreadable. "Officer Carter," Captain Lewis began, his voice clipped. "We need to discuss the events of last night, specifically the interaction you had with Ms. Michelle Grant." Ryan swallowed hard, nodding. "Yes, sir. We've reviewed the available evidence, including the video footage circulating online," Lewis continued. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Ryan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Denying the obvious wouldn't help. It was all there in black and white, or rather, pixels. Instead, he opted for damage control. "Sir, I admit I may have overreacted during the stop. But it was a routine traffic violation and I was simply enforcing the law." One of the Internal Affairs reps raised an eyebrow. "Enforcing the law doesn't include physical contact unless absolutely necessary, Officer Carter. Can you explain why you felt it was justified in this instance?" Ryan hesitated, searching for the right words. I lost my temper. It won't happen again." Captain Lewis sighed, rubbing his temples. "That's not enough, Ryan. This isn't just about you losing your temper. This is about trust between the police force and the community we serve. Right now, that trust is hanging by a thread. You know how sensitive things are." Ryan nodded mutely, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Trust, accountability. Those were buzzwords he'd heard countless times in training sessions and department meetings, but hearing them now, in this context, made them hit differently. For the first time, he realized how much was at stake, not just for him personally, but for the entire department. After the meeting, Ryan returned to his desk, his mind swirling with conflicting emotions. Anger, shame, fear, all jumbled together in a chaotic mess. He tried to focus on paperwork, but the task felt meaningless. Every time he glanced up, he caught glimpses of colleagues whispering among themselves. Some avoided eye contact altogether, while others shot him sympathetic looks. Neither reaction brought him comfort. By late afternoon, news broke that Michelle Grant had filed an official complaint against him. According to reports, she planned to pursue disciplinary action through the City Council's Oversight Committee. Ryan groaned inwardly. Of course she did. Why wouldn't she? He had treated her poorly, violated her rights, and embarrassed her in front of God knows how many people. If he were in her shoes, he'd want justice too. But what Ryan didn't know, and what no one had told him yet, was that Michelle Grant wasn't just any ordinary citizen. She was a prominent figure in New York City politics, known for her advocacy work on issues like police reform and civil rights. Her appointment as the new Commissioner of Police Oversight had been announced weeks earlier, though Ryan hadn't paid attention to the news. Now, as fate would have it, she held the power to make life very difficult for him, and for the entire department. As the sun set over the city skyline, Ryan sat alone in the dimly lit precinct, staring blankly at his computer screen. The weight of his actions and their consequences pressed heavily on his shoulders. Tomorrow would bring another day, another chance to face whatever storm awaited him. But tonight, all he could do was sit in silence, wondering if redemption was still possible, or if he had sealed his fate forever. The next morning, Ryan arrived at the precinct earlier than usual. He hadn't slept much the night before, his mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. The video of the incident was still making waves online, and every news outlet seemed to have picked up the story. Headlines like "Cops' Aggressive Behavior Sparks Outcry" and "New Commissioner Vows Accountability" dominated the feeds. It felt surreal to see his name and face splashed across screens everywhere. As he entered the building, the tension in the air was palpable. Officers who usually greeted him with a nod or a quick joke now avoided eye contact altogether. Some whispered behind their hands as he passed by, their voices low but unmistakably judgmental. Ryan clenched his jaw and kept walking, pretending not to notice. He didn't blame them for talking. If roles were reversed, he might have done the same. Still, it stung. Captain Lewis called him into his office shortly after roll call. This time, the mood was different. There was no internal affairs rep present, just Lewis sitting behind his desk with a folder open in front of him. His expression was unreadable, neither angry nor sympathetic. "Ryan," Lewis began, gesturing for him to sit, "there's something you need to know. Michelle Grant has been officially appointed as the new Commissioner of Police Oversight." Ryan blinked, unsure he'd heard correctly. "Commissioner? As in, my boss?" Lewis nodded slowly. "Yes. She starts today, and she's requested a department-wide meeting to introduce herself and outline her priorities." Ryan felt his stomach drop. Of course. Why wouldn't it be her? It was almost poetic, really. The woman he had wronged would now hold ultimate authority over his career. He wanted to laugh, but the sound stuck in his throat. Instead, he stared at the floor, trying to process the enormity of the situation. "She knows about the incident," Lewis added, his tone grave, "and she intends to address it personally." Ryan swallowed hard. "What does that mean for me?" "It means you'll have to face her sooner or later," Lewis replied. "But for now, focus on getting through today. Keep your head down, show respect, and let her take the lead." Ryan nodded numbly. What choice did he have? He couldn't run from this, no matter how much he wanted to. Later that afternoon, the entire department gathered in the conference room. Rows of chairs filled the space, and officers sat stiffly, exchanging nervous glances. At the front of the room stood a podium, where Michelle Grant would speak. Ryan took a seat near the back, hoping to blend into the crowd. He kept his eyes fixed on the floor, avoiding any chance of meeting hers. When Michelle walked in, the room fell silent. She wore a sharp navy blue suit, her braids pulled back neatly. Her presence commanded attention without effort. She moved with purpose, taking her place at the podium and scanning the room with steady eyes. When her gaze landed briefly on Ryan, he felt a jolt of panic. Did she recognize him? Could she tell how terrified he was? "Good afternoon," Michelle began, her voice clear and confident. "Thank you all for being here today. I'm honored to step into the role of Commissioner of Police Oversight, and I look forward to working alongside each of you to strengthen trust between law enforcement and the communities we serve." Her words were measured, professional, yet tinged with an underlying intensity. She spoke about transparency, accountability, and reform, topics Ryan had heard countless times before but never truly considered. Today, however, they hit differently. Every sentence felt like a direct reflection of his actions, a reminder of the harm he had caused. "As many of you may know," Michelle continued, "I recently experienced firsthand the challenges faced by citizens during interactions with police officers. While I believe most of you are dedicated professionals committed to serving and protecting, there are moments when trust is broken, not just for individuals, but for entire communities." Ryan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He could feel the weight of her words pressing down on him, even though she hadn't singled him out. "Yet, I'm here to ensure that such incidents are addressed swiftly and fairly," Michelle said, her tone firm. "We must hold ourselves accountable, not only to uphold the law but to embody the values of justice and fairness we claim to represent." The room remained silent, the gravity of her message sinking in. When she finished speaking, Michelle paused, letting her words linger in the air. Then, without another glance at the audience, she stepped away from the podium and left the room. Ryan exhaled deeply, realizing he'd been holding his breath. That was it. She hadn't called him out publicly, hadn't humiliated him in front of his peers. But he knew better than to think he was off the hook. If anything, her restraint made him even more uneasy. A few hours later, a memo appeared in Ryan's inbox. Michelle Grant requested a private meeting with him at 4 p.m. His heart sank. This was it, the moment he'd been dreading. There was no escaping it now. At exactly 4 o'clock, Ryan knocked on the door of Michelle's office. Her assistant ushered him inside, closing the door behind him. The room was sleek and modern, with large windows overlooking the city skyline. Michelle sat behind her desk, reviewing documents on a tablet. She looked up as he entered, her expression unreadable. "Officer Carter," she said, gesturing for him to sit. "Thank you for coming." Ryan nodded, lowering himself into the chair across from her. His palms were sweaty, and his throat felt dry. He cleared it nervously before speaking. "Ma'am, Michelle held up a hand, cutting him off. "Let me start," she said calmly. "First, I want to acknowledge that our encounter was difficult, for both of us. I won't deny that your actions upset me, not just because of how they affected me personally, but because they reflect larger issues within the system." Ryan nodded again, unable to find the words to respond. He braced himself for what came next. "I've reviewed the footage and reports," Michelle continued. "And while I understand that emotions can run high during confrontations, physical force should never be used unless absolutely necessary. Your behavior crossed a line, Officer Carter." "I know," Ryan blurted out, surprising even himself. "I messed up. I shouldn't have grabbed you like that. I don't know what came over me." Michelle studied him for a moment, her expression softening slightly. "Do you regret it?" "Yes," Ryan said quickly, his voice trembling. "Absolutely, I never meant to hurt anyone. I just lost control." She leaned back in her chair, folding her hands on the desk. "Regret is a start, but it isn't enough. Actions have consequences, Officer Carter. You violated my rights, and that violation undermines public trust in law enforcement. If we're going to rebuild that trust, we need accountability." Ryan nodded, feeling a lump form in his throat. "I understand." Michelle paused, considering him carefully. Finally, she spoke. "Here's what's going to happen. You have two options. 1, you can resign quietly, and we'll close the case here. Or 2, you can agree to undergo mandatory sensitivity training and community service under strict supervision. If you choose the latter, your progress will be monitored closely. Any further misconduct will result in immediate termination." Ryan's mind raced. Resignation would mean losing everything: the badge, the pension, the identity he'd built over years of service. But staying meant facing scrutiny and admitting fault publicly. Neither option appealed to him. but deep down, he knew which path he had to take. "I'll do the training," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Whatever it takes." Michelle nodded, seemingly unsurprised by his decision. "Good. We'll begin arrangements immediately. Consider this an opportunity, Officer Carter, not just to learn but to grow. Change starts with individuals, and I hope you'll rise to the challenge." Ryan stood, offering a hesitant nod. "Thank you, ma'am." As he left her office, he felt a strange mix of relief and dread. Relief that he hadn't been fired outright, but dread at the long road ahead. For the first time, he realized how much work needed to be done, not just within the department, but within himself. And as intimidating as it seemed, he also felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was his chance to make things right. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest Ryan had ever faced. Sensitivity training wasn't just a series of lectures or workshops, it was an emotional and mental reckoning. Every session forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about himself, his biases, and the system he had been part of for so long. At first, Ryan resisted. He told himself it was all a waste of time, that people were blowing things out of proportion. But as the days turned into weeks, something began to shift inside him. The training sessions were led by a community activist named Jamal Hughes, a man in his 50s with a warm smile and piercing eyes that seemed to see straight through you. Jamal didn't sugarcoat anything. He spoke plainly about the pain and mistrust many communities felt toward law enforcement. He shared stories from people who had been victims of police misconduct, not just physical violence but neglect, profiling, and dismissive attitudes. Some of the stories made Ryan squirm in his seat, while others left him speechless. During one particularly intense session, Jamal asked the group of officers to reflect on their own experiences. "Think about a time when you felt powerless," he said, pacing slowly in front of them. "When someone in authority treated you unfairly or didn't listen to you. How did that feel?" Ryan hesitated, unsure how to respond. He had always seen himself as the one in control, the person with the badge and the power. But as he thought back, memories surfaced that he had buried long ago. Memories of being bullied as a kid, of teachers dismissing his struggles because he came from a rough neighborhood. For the first time, he realized how those feelings of helplessness might mirror what others experienced during negative encounters with police. After the session, Jamal pulled Ryan aside. "You've got potential," he said, his tone kind but firm. "But you need to stop seeing this as punishment and start seeing it as growth. This isn't just about saving your job, it's about becoming better. For yourself, for the people you serve, and for the future." Ryan nodded, feeling a mix of gratitude and frustration. Gratitude because Jamal's words resonated deeply, and frustration because change wasn't easy. It felt like untangling a knot that had been tied for years. Still, he resolved to try harder. In addition to the training, Ryan was required to participate in community service. Once a week, he volunteered at a youth center in a neighborhood he rarely visited. The kids there ranged from elementary school age to teenagers, and most were wary of him at first. They eyed him suspiciously, whispering among themselves whenever he walked by. Ryan couldn't blame them. He knew what they must have heard about cops like him. To break the ice, he started helping with small tasks, organizing sports equipment, setting up tables for events, and even assisting with homework when needed. Slowly, the children began to warm up to him. One boy, Marcus, stood out. He was about 10 years old with a mop of curly hair and a mischievous grin. Marcus loved basketball, but struggled with math, often staying late at the center to finish his assignments. One afternoon, Ryan sat down next to Marcus, offering to help him solve a tricky problem. At first, Marcus was hesitant, glancing at Ryan sideways as if expecting him to snap or lose patience. But Ryan stayed calm, guiding him step by step until the answer clicked. When Marcus finally solved the problem, his face lit up with pride. "You're not so bad, Officer Carter," Marcus said, grinning. "Maybe you should be a teacher instead." Ryan chuckled, though the comment struck a chord. Maybe he couldn't undo the past, but he could choose how he moved forward. Helping Marcus reminded him why he joined the force in the first place. to make a difference, however small. Back at the precinct, Ryan's colleagues noticed a change in him. He no longer snapped at people during tense situations or jumped to conclusions based on appearances. Instead, he listened more and acted less impulsively. Some officers teased him, saying he'd gone soft, but others respected the effort he was putting in. Even Captain Lewis acknowledged the progress during a routine evaluation. "You're doing good work, Ryan," Lewis said, leaning back in his chair. "Keep it up. People are starting to notice." Ryan nodded, grateful for the encouragement. Still, he knew he had a long way to go. Redemption wasn't something that happened overnight. It took consistent effort and humility. And Michelle, Grant kept a close watch on him, ensuring he followed through on every requirement. Their interactions remained professional but distant. Michelle didn't treat him differently from other officers, nor did she single him out for praise or criticism. Yet Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that she saw right through him, that she understood the internal battle he was fighting. Occasionally, their paths crossed in the hallway and she would nod politely before moving on. Each nod felt like a silent acknowledgement of his efforts, a small but meaningful gesture. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at the youth center, Ryan found himself sitting alone in his car, staring at the steering wheel. His mind wandered back to the night of the incident, the anger, the fear, the split-second decision that changed everything. He realized now how much of his behavior stemmed from insecurity. Being challenged, especially by someone like Michelle, had triggered a defensive reaction he hadn't known how to manage. But things were different now. He was learning to recognize those triggers and respond differently. He was learning to listen, not just to hear, but to truly understand. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when doubt crept in. Would anyone ever trust him again? Could he really make amends for what he had done? As he drove home, Ryan decided to write a letter to Michelle. Not an apology, she had already heard plenty of those, but a genuine expression of gratitude. She had given him a second chance when she didn't have to, and for that, he owed her more than he could put into words. The next morning, Ryan handed the folded letter to Michelle's assistant, asking her to pass it along. He didn't expect a response, so he was surprised when Michelle stopped him in the hallway later that day. "I read your letter," she said, her voice neutral but not unkind. "Thank you for writing it." Ryan swallowed hard, unsure what to say. "I meant every word," he replied finally. "I know I can't undo what happened, but I'm trying. Really trying." Michelle studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I believe you. Keep going, Officer Carter. That's all any of us can do." With that, she walked away, leaving Ryan standing there, a flicker of hope blooming in his chest. Change wasn't easy, but it was possible, and for the first time in a long time, Ryan felt like he was on the right path. Months passed, and Ryan's transformation became more evident to those around him. The once brash and defensive officer had softened, not just in his actions, but in his demeanor. He no longer walked into situations with a chip on his shoulder, or an assumption that everyone was out to challenge him. Instead, he approached people with patience and a willingness to listen. It wasn't always easy. There were still moments when old habits threatened to resurface, but Ryan worked hard to stay mindful of his behavior. The community service at the youth center continued to be a cornerstone of his rehabilitation. Marcus, the boy who loved basketball, had become something of a regular companion for Ryan during his volunteer hours. They bonded over games of one-on-one and math problems scribbled on scrap paper. Marcus began opening up about his life, the challenges of growing up without a father figure, the pressure to fit in with peers, and his dreams of becoming a teacher someday. Ryan listened intently, offering advice when asked, but mostly just being present. One day, as they sat together after practice, Marcus looked up at Ryan and said, "You know, you're kind of like my coach now." Ryan smiled, touched by the comment. "I'm just glad I can help," he replied. "You've got a lot of potential, Marcus. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Marcus grinned, tossing the basketball into the air. "Maybe one day I'll come back here and teach kids too, like you." The moment stayed with Ryan long after he left the center that evening. It reminded him why this journey mattered, not just for himself, but for the next generation. If he could show even one kid that authority figures weren't all bad, then maybe he'd done some good. At the precinct, Ryan's reputation slowly began to shift. Some colleagues still viewed him with skepticism, whispering behind his back about how he'd been forced to change. But others saw the genuine effort he was putting in and respected it. His partnership with Greg grew stronger as well. The two men often discussed the complexities of policing and how they could improve their approach to difficult situations. Greg noticed the difference most during traffic stops. Where Ryan used to bark orders and demand compliance, he now spoke calmly and respectfully, explaining the reason for the stop and giving people a chance to respond. It wasn't perfect. There were still tense moments, but it was progress. And progress mattered. Even Michelle Grant acknowledged the changes, though she remained cautious in her praise. During routine evaluations, she noted improvements in Ryan's conduct and interactions with the public. She also assigned him to assist in training new recruits, focusing on cultural awareness and de-escalation techniques. At first, Ryan hesitated, unsure if he was qualified to teach others, but Michelle reassured him. "You've learned valuable lessons," she told him. "Share them. Let your experience guide others so they don't make the same mistakes." Ryan took the responsibility seriously. Standing in front of a group of wide-eyed rookies, he shared stories from his own journey. Not just the successes, but the failures, too. He talked about the night he lost control, the fallout that followed, and the steps he took to rebuild trust. The recruits listened intently, asking questions and sharing their own concerns about navigating the complexities of modern policing. "It's not about being perfect," Ryan told them during one session. "It's about recognizing when you're wrong and doing what it takes to fix it. That's how we earn respect, not through force, but through understanding." His words resonated deeply, earning nods of agreement from the group. For the first time in years, Ryan felt like he was making a real impact, not just as an enforcer of laws, but as a mentor and advocate for change. As spring arrived, the city hosted its annual Community Unity Day, an event designed to bring officers and residents together in a spirit of collaboration. Food trucks lined the streets, live music filled the air, and booths offered information on everything from neighborhood safety initiatives to mental health resources. Ryan attended alongside other officers, many of whom were nervous about how they'd be received. To his surprise, the atmosphere was warm and welcoming. Families approached the officer's booth, asking questions and sharing their thoughts. Children played games organized by volunteers, laughing and smiling freely. Ryan spent much of the day interacting with attendees, answering questions and handing out flyers about upcoming programs. At one point, Michelle arrived, dressed casually in jeans and a blazer. She mingled with the crowd, stopping occasionally, to chat with officers and community members alike. When she reached Ryan's booth, she paused, surveying the scene with a satisfied smile. "This is good," she said, nodding toward the bustling crowd. "Real progress." Ryan nodded, feeling a swell of pride. "It feels different today. Like, people are willing to try again." "They are," Michelle agreed. "But it's up to us to keep earning that trust. Every single day." Ryan met her gaze, seeing both challenge and encouragement in her eyes. "I'll do my part," he promised, "for as long as it takes." Michelle didn't respond immediately. Instead, she extended her hand, which Ryan shook firmly. It was a simple gesture, but it carried weight, a silent acknowledgement of how far they'd both come since that fateful night. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ryan stood alone near the edge of the park, watching the festivities wind down. The laughter of children echoed in the distance, mingling with the fading strains of music. He thought about everything that had happened over the past months, the struggles, the breakthroughs, the small victories. It hadn't been easy, and there were still days when doubt crept in. But he knew one thing for certain. He was better than he used to be. Not perfect, but better. A voice interrupted his thoughts. Officer Carter? He turned to see Marcus standing there holding a crumpled piece of paper. Hey, Marcus, what's up? I made this for you, Marcus said shyly, handing over the paper. On it was a crude but heartfelt drawing of Ryan and Marcus playing basketball, surrounded by stick-figure kids cheering them on. Beneath the picture, written in uneven letters, were the words, "Thank you for being cool." Ryan felt a lump rise in his throat. This is amazing, Marcus. Thank you. Marcus beamed, clearly pleased with himself. You're welcome. See you next week? Definitely, Ryan replied, ruffling the boy's hair affectionately. As Marcus ran off to join his friends, Ryan unfolded the drawing again, studying it closely. It wasn't much, but it meant everything. In that moment, he realized that redemption wasn't about erasing the past, it was about building a future worth living for. And for the first time in a long time, Ryan felt hopeful about what lay ahead.